I'm not going there. That's it. I'm not going any further. We had a great career together. It was fantastic, and almost surprised that we managed somehow to create this great work.
At 82 years old, Roger Waters has lived a life that most musicians can only dream of. As the creative force behind some of Pink Floyd's iconic albums, he helped craft soundscapes that defined a generation. But behind the legendary music lies a story of creative partnership, artistic tension, and a relationship that has fascinated fans for decades. But time has a way of providing perspective. And at 82, Roger Waters is reflecting on his relationship with David Gilmour with a nuance and honesty that has been absent from previous discussions. In this video, we'll find out the truth. The creative partnership that changed rock music. When Roger Waters speaks about early days with David Gilmour, a noticeable change shows up in delivery. Usual sharp edge fades a little, replaced by something softer, almost reflective. Words come out with a kind of quiet respect. Waters recalls that Gilmour joined Pink Floyd in 1967, and right from that moment, something stood out. Not just skill, not just clean technique, but feeling. Waters explains that guitar playing carried emotion in a way that felt rare. Almost like a voice. Almost like singing without words. How many guitarists could really do that back then? Back in that period, everything around the band felt unstable. Syd Barrett, original creative force, had begun to struggle heavily, with mental health challenges made worse by substance use. Studio sessions became unpredictable. Live performances turned difficult. Direction started slipping. A band built on imagination suddenly needed stability. That gap had to be filled somehow. Gilmour, already connected through friendship with Barrett, stepped in at exactly that moment. Timing alone raises questions. Was that luck or something closer to fate? Waters admits now that Gilmour did more than just fill a space. Presence brought balance. Strong vocals, steady personality, and serious musical discipline came together in one person. That combination mattered more than anyone expected at first. Waters says that without Gilmour, the future of Pink Floyd could have gone in a very different direction. Barrett had vision, pure and original, but that vision was fading. Gilmour arrived with a grounded approach, something practical, something steady. In a situation that could have collapsed, that kind of presence made all the difference. Without that grounding force, what path would have opened instead? Early years after Barrett saw a more shared approach, everyone contributed ideas. Songs came from different angles. No single voice controlled everything. But over time, especially moving into the 1970s, things began to shift. Waters started taking more control of direction, more responsibility for themes and lyrics. That shift created a new kind of partnership with Gilmour. One focused on contrast, one focused on balance between concept and sound. Waters explains that roles became clear. Concept, lyrics, overall message came from one side. Musical expansion, texture, and emotional lift came from the other. Waters would bring in an idea, sometimes just a rough structure, sometimes a full concept built around bigger themes. Gilmour would take that bass and turn it into something richer. Guitar lines, melodies, atmosphere, all adding layers that made everything feel bigger. When that balance worked, results felt almost effortless. When that balance broke, tension followed. Is that not how most creative partnerships go? By 1973, that balance produced something huge. The Dark Side of the Moon arrived and changed everything. Massive success followed, staying on charts for years and reaching audiences far beyond what anyone expected. Themes explored time, pressure, mental struggle, and everyday human fears. Heavy ideas, but presented in a way that felt accessible. That accessibility came from music as much as words. Gilmour's guitar work stood right at the center of that impact. Solos carried emotion in a direct way. Vocals added warmth and depth. Waters reflects that collaboration still felt real during that album. Contributions from Gilmour shaped key songs, Guitar solo on Time became instantly recognizable. Vocal presence on Breathe set a tone that carried through the entire project. A band still working together, even with growing creative control from Waters. That mix created something powerful. Remove either side, and would that album still feel the same? 2 years later, Wish You Were Here pushed things further. Themes turned more personal, more emotional. Inspiration came partly from Barrett's decline, adding a layer of sadness underneath the music. Waters focused heavily on absence and loss. Gilmour translated that feeling into sound. Title track became a perfect example of that blend. Lyrics spoke directly about distance and memory. Guitar melody carried a kind of quiet ache that made those words land harder. Waters admits that this period showed both strength and weakness in the partnership. When both sides aligned, results felt complete. When disagreements showed up, cracks became visible. Arguments over direction, control, and creative decisions started increasing. Whose vision should lead? Whose idea mattered more? Questions like that do not stay quiet for long. By 1977, Animals reflected a clear shift. Waters drove almost everything conceptually. Inspired by Animal Farm, album focused on social class and harsh criticism of society. Tone felt darker, more direct, less open to interpretation. Gilmour still contributed musically, but involvement in concept became limited. Reports suggest frustration started building. A talented musician wants more than just execution. That tension sat quietly in the background, waiting. Then came The Wall, a massive project, deeply personal and ambitious. A full rock opera centered on isolation and emotional barriers. Waters controlled nearly every aspect of direction. Lyrics came straight from personal experience. Structure followed a clear narrative. Gilmour contributed key musical elements, including some of the most famous guitar work in rock history. Comfortably Numb stands as a clear example. Guitar solo from that track still gets mentioned among the greatest ever recorded. But behind that brilliance, creative conflict grew stronger. Waters admits that control during that period became overwhelming. Direction was fixed, with little room for compromise. From one perspective, that focus helped create something powerful. From another perspective, that same control limited collaboration. Gilmour's role shifted more toward execution rather than shared creation. That change could not feel easy. An artist with strong ability wants space to contribute fully. Without that space, frustration becomes natural. Even with all that tension, respect never fully disappeared. Waters acknowledges that Gilmour has a natural musical instinct that cannot be taught. Ability to create beauty almost effortlessly stands out clearly. Words can describe ideas, but sound makes people feel those ideas. That difference matters. Waters explains that structure and lyrics for Comfortably Numb came from one place, but emotional impact of that song came strongly from Gilmour's guitar work. That solo carries feeling in a direct way. Listeners remember that sound long after words fade. Does that not say something important about how music really connects? Looking back now, a more complicated picture slowly comes into focus, almost like pieces of a puzzle finally being spread out on a table. A partnership built on contrast, strengthened by difference, yet quietly strained by control, direction, and competing visions of what the future should sound like. Both sides brought something essential to the table, and without either, the entire structure shifts. That balance helped shape some of rock's most important music, but it also carried the seeds of its own collapse. And what actually tore them apart runs deeper than it first appears. So stay glued till the very end. The fundamental differences that tore them apart. Conversation around Pink Floyd always circles back to a partnership that felt powerful, but carried tension from early days. Reflection from Roger Waters now sounds more open, almost like an acceptance that something deeper than simple arguments pulled everything apart. Not just ego, not just personality, but a difference in how music itself was understood. How could two people stand in the same studio and hear completely different purposes in the same sound? Reported explanation from Waters often returns to a simple contrast. David Gilmour focused on sound, feeling, Atmosphere. Music as something beautiful that moves emotion without needing explanation. Waters approached music like a message waiting to be delivered. Lyrics, themes, structure, everything tied to meaning. One side leaned toward emotion, another toward communication. Can such a gap really stay hidden for long? As time passed, control inside the band started shifting. Albums became more driven by ideas, more structured around concepts. Gilmour preferred space, letting listeners interpret meaning freely. Waters preferred direction, guiding listeners toward a specific thought or reaction. Reported conversations describe moments where Gilmour questioned why everything needed a deeper meaning. Why not just create something that sounds good? That question alone reveals everything, does it not? Waters often described a sense of responsibility tied to success. A large audience meant influence, and influence meant purpose. Music could not remain just sound. Music had to say something about life, about conflict, about society. Gilmour's approach stayed rooted in sound first. A guitar tone, a melody, a feeling. Two strong beliefs standing side by side, both valid, yet constantly clashing. How long can two valid ideas coexist when direction must be chosen? Studio sessions reflected that divide clearly. Waters would focus on themes, on how each track connects, on the bigger picture across an album. Gilmour would focus on chords, structure, arrangement, the craft of the song itself. One mind building a narrative, another shaping sound. Reported recollections describe moments where explanations about concept met visible disinterest, not out of disrespect, but out of difference. Almost like two languages spoken in the same room without translation. Temperament added another layer to the tension. Waters has openly described a very intense approach. Strong vision, little patience for compromise, a need to push ideas through exactly as imagined. Gilmour carried a calmer presence, more open to collaboration, more willing to adjust and find balance. On paper, that combination could create something great. In reality, it often created frustration. When one side pushes forward without compromise and another side prefers harmony, what outcome should be expected? That friction reached a clear breaking point during the final cut. The album carried deeply personal themes connected to war and loss, especially tied to Waters' father's experience in World War II. Emotional weight sat heavily on every track. Participation from Gilmour became limited, and dissatisfaction became obvious. Creative direction no longer felt shared. At that stage, could the project still be called a band effort? Waters has admitted that focus during that period stayed locked on personal expression. Connection with bandmates became secondary. Whether others agreed or not stopped mattering. That level of focus can create powerful art, but also distance. When one voice dominates completely, what happens to collaboration? After that album, departure from the band followed. Expectation from Waters leaned toward an ending. Without the main creative driver, continuation seemed unlikely. Yet Gilmour and Nick Mason chose to continue under the same name. New music arrived, including A Momentary Lapse of Reason, along with large tours that drew massive audiences. That move sparked anger from Waters. From that perspective, the name carried a meaning shaped over years of writing and concept building. Seeing that name move forward without that original direction felt wrong. Legal action followed, turning creative disagreement into a public dispute. Argument centered on ownership. Who truly defined Pink Floyd? Courts eventually ruled in favor of continuation by remaining members. Recognition of the band as a partnership meant shared rights. That decision hit hard for Waters, not just about business, but about identity. If years of leading creative direction did not translate into ownership, what did that say about contribution? Looking back now, tone from Waters carries more reflection than anger. Acknowledgement appears more clearly. Even with dominant influence during later years, Pink Floyd never existed as a solo creation. Contributions from Gilmour shaped the sound. Drumming from Mason held everything together. Keyboard textures from Richard Wright added depth that defined the band's atmosphere. Trying to separate one element from the rest ignores how music actually comes together. That realization does not erase past conflict, but it explains the complexity. Strong vision built iconic albums. At the same time, collaboration gave those ideas life. Without both elements, the result would not carry the same impact. So where does that leave the original conflict? Maybe exactly where it started, with two different beliefs about what music should be. One side believed music should carry a clear message, structured and intentional, almost like a language meant to be understood. The other side treated music as pure emotion, something to feel deeply without rules or limits. Neither approach was truly wrong, but putting both visions inside the same band created constant tension that quietly built over time. That tension slowly shifted into division, and division eventually led to separation. But what followed was even more painful, and the years of bitterness that came after revealed just how much it all truly cost them. Stay glued till the very end. The years of bitterness and what it cost them. Roger Waters and David Gilmour remain two names permanently tied to one of the most influential bands in modern music history, yet the relationship between Roger Waters and David Gilmour has long been defined by tension, separation, and years of public disagreement. Decades after the split from Pink Floyd, Roger Waters reflects on that long stretch with a noticeably softer tone, describing a history filled with anger, pride, and missed opportunities that never needed to stretch so far. Roger Waters explains that anger shaped many of the decisions made during and after the breakup. David Gilmour felt frustration about creative control struggles and the direction of Pink Floyd during the final years together. Roger Waters felt frustration about what was perceived as takeover of the Pink Floyd name after departure. Both perspectives clashed in interviews and press appearances, creating a public rivalry that fans followed closely for decades. What purpose did repeated arguments serve in public spaces when musical legacy already stood strong on record? Roger Waters recalls saying harsh things about David Gilmour during various interviews across the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. Those statements included criticism of musical direction and creative choices. Roger Waters now describes those comments as born out of anger and defensive thinking rather than fair assessment. Roger Waters also acknowledges David Gilmour as an extraordinary musician whose guitar work contributed significantly to Pink Floyd's sound. How often does pride overshadow respect between collaborators who once built something globally recognized together? David Gilmour, during the same years, expressed equally strong opinions about Roger Waters' solo work and creative direction. Public statements from both sides created a cycle of responses and counter-responses. Each interview added another layer to the divide. Music journalists often highlighted the conflict as if rivalry defined the entire legacy of Pink Floyd, rather than the albums, performances, and innovations that originally brought worldwide acclaim. Fans of Pink Floyd were placed in a difficult position throughout these years. Appreciation for albums such as The Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals, and The Wall often came alongside awareness of ongoing disagreement between Roger Waters and David Gilmour. Conversations among fans frequently shifted from music appreciation to debates about creative credit and leadership. Why does artistic achievement so often become overshadowed by personal disagreement after success reaches global scale? Roger Waters also reflects on regret regarding public criticism of David Gilmour musicianship. Statements made during heated periods are now described as unfair and exaggerated. Roger Waters acknowledges that David Gilmour's approach to music carried emotional depth and technical brilliance that complemented Roger Waters' conceptual vision during Pink Floyd years. Separation of roles within Pink Floyd created a balance that neither Roger Waters nor David Gilmour fully replicated alone afterward. Professional separation also carried real consequences during major public moments. Induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1996 presented an opportunity for unity, yet Roger Waters did not share the stage with David Gilmour and other members. The moment became another symbol of distance rather than reunion. Opportunities for shared performances appeared occasionally over the years, yet emotional barriers consistently prevented lasting collaboration. Roger Waters reflects on missed chances during those periods. Shared performances could have offered closure or renewed cooperation, yet pride and unresolved emotional weight remained dominant. Roger Waters describes both sides as holding strong belief in personal artistic direction. David Gilmour maintained commitment to musical integrity and sound evolution within post-Waters Pink Floyd. Roger Waters maintained commitment to conceptual structure and lyrical storytelling as defining elements of Pink Floyd identity. Where does collaboration end and ego begin in long creative partnerships? Financial and artistic outcomes following separation also diverged from expectations. Roger Waters' solo albums gained respect for conceptual ambition but did not reach the same cultural scale as Pink Floyd releases. David Gilmour led versions of Pink Floyd after departure, producing commercially successful albums that received mixed critical responses regarding conceptual depth compared with earlier Pink Floyd works. Both directions achieved success, yet neither fully matched combined impact of earlier collaboration. Roger Waters now openly states recognition that Pink Floyd functioned best as combined effort rather than separate achievements. Musical concepts developed by Roger Waters gained greater expression through David Gilmour guitar work and sound design. David Gilmour musical strength reached greater narrative depth when guided by structured conceptual frameworks. Why does clarity about collaboration often appear only after decades of separation? Personal life consequences also appear within Roger Waters' reflection. Long-standing anger toward David Gilmour and associated Pink Floyd conflicts influenced emotional state across multiple relationships. Carrying unresolved frustration over long periods created internal strain that extended beyond professional matters. Roger Waters describes difficulty maintaining emotional presence in personal life while holding on to historical grievances. How much energy disappears when attention remains anchored in past disagreements? Occasional moments of reconciliation did occur. Live 8 performance in London in 2005 brought Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright together on stage for a short performance. Musical chemistry returned immediately during that appearance, demonstrating enduring compatibility among Pink Floyd members. Audience response worldwide highlighted emotional significance of that reunion moment. Yet underlying disagreements remained unresolved after performance ended. Roger Waters reflects on Live 8 as evidence of remaining musical connection. Shared performance demonstrated that collaboration potential still existed. However, backstage discussions and long-term cooperation remained blocked by deeper philosophical differences and accumulated emotional history. Creative control questions and personal grievances continued to prevent sustained reunion. Death of Richard Wright in 2008 marked another turning point in reflection for Roger Waters and David Gilmour. Richard Wright contributed essential atmospheric layers to Pink Floyd's sound from early formation through later years. Passing of Richard Wright highlighted passage of time and limited opportunities for reconciliation among surviving members. Roger Waters describes emotional impact of loss and recognition of time spent in conflict rather than cooperation. How many creative opportunities disappear simply because resolution arrives too late? After Richard Wright passing, public comments between Roger Waters and David Gilmour continued intermittently, sometimes softer, sometimes still critical. Relationship patterns shifted between brief moments of acknowledgement and renewed distance. Neither full reconciliation nor complete separation defined later years. Instead, ongoing complexity remained a consistent feature of public interaction. Roger Waters' current reflection centers on time lost rather than victory in disagreements. Years spent in anger produced no lasting resolution or benefit to artistic legacy. Pink Floyd catalog remains globally celebrated, yet internal conflict shaped public narratives surrounding legacy. legacy. Roger Waters expresses understanding that recognition of shared contribution holds more value than continued defense of past positions. Roger Waters ultimately frames conclusion around simple realization. Years of disagreement between Roger Waters and David Gilmour cannot be restored or rewritten. Musical legacy already established remains unchanged regardless of personal conflict. Question remains for reflection. How many moments of creativity and connection disappear when pride becomes more important than collaboration? Perspective at 82. At 82, Roger Waters has the perspective that only age and distance can provide. He's no longer the angry, driven artist fighting for control of his legacy. He's a man looking back on a remarkable career and trying to make sense of the relationships that defined it. And when he talks about David Gilmour now, there's a complexity and nuance that has been absent from previous discussions. I understand David better now than I did when we were working together, Waters says. I understand that his approach to music, creating beauty, focusing on the emotional rather than the intellectual, wanting to make people feel rather than think, is just as valid as mine. It's not better or worse, it's different. And for a while, those different approaches created something extraordinary. Waters is willing to acknowledge now that some of his criticisms of Gilmour over the years were unfair and rooted in his own insecurities. When I criticized David's work after I left Pink Floyd, part of that was genuine artistic disagreement, Waters admits. But part of it was fear. Fear that Pink Floyd could succeed without me. That maybe I wasn't as essential as I wanted to believe. When a momentary lapse of reason and The Division Bell were commercially successful, it challenged my narrative about being the creative force behind Pink Floyd. This kind of self-awareness has come slowly and painfully. Waters has never been one for easy introspection or quick admissions of fault. But age, therapy, and the perspective of time have allowed him to see the Pink Floyd story and his relationship with Gilmour with greater clarity. David Gilmour is one of the greatest guitarists in rock history, Waters states unequivocally. His tone, his phrasing, his ability to convey emotion through his instrument, it's extraordinary. When I listen to his solo on Comfortably Numb or his work on Shine on You Crazy Diamond, I'm reminded of just how talented he is. My ego wanted to minimize his contributions, to claim that I could have achieved the same results with any competent guitarist. But that's nonsense. David's contributions were unique and irreplaceable. Waters is also willing to acknowledge that Gilmour's musical instincts sometimes improved his conceptual ideas. There were times when I had a concept that was too heavy-handed, too obvious, too didactic, Waters admits. David's musical approach, his focus on atmosphere and emotion, softened those edges, made the ideas more accessible without dumbing them down. The best Pink Floyd work happened when my concepts and David's musicality were in balance. The question of reconciliation is complicated. Waters and Gilmour are not friends, and at their age, with their history, they are unlikely to become friends. But there's been a softening, a mutual acknowledgement of what they created together and what they meant to each other's artistic development. David and I will never have a warm, close relationship, Waters says matter-of-factly. Too much has happened. Too many things have been said, too many years have passed. But I can respect him, appreciate his talents, and acknowledge his essential role in Pink Floyd's success. And I think he can do the same for me. In recent years, there have been small gestures that suggest a détente, if not a full reconciliation. Waters has spoken more generously about Gilmour's contributions in interviews. Gilmour has acknowledged Waters' conceptual genius and lyrical abilities. They're not collaborating, not performing together, not spending time in each other's company, but they're also not actively feuding. At 82, I don't have the energy or the desire to maintain old feuds, Waters says. Life is too short, and the music we created together is too important to be overshadowed by personal animosity. When I think about my legacy, I want people to remember the music, not the lawsuits and the bitter interviews. Waters is also thinking about how the Pink Floyd story will be remembered after both he and Gilmour are gone. Someday, neither David nor I will be here to tell our side of the story, Waters reflects. All that will remain is the music, and when people listen to Dark Side of the Moon, or Wish You Were Here, or The Wall, I want them to hear the collaboration, the creative tension, the combination of different talents and visions that made those albums possible. I want them to understand that great art often comes from conflict and contradiction, not from easy harmony. There's also a recognition that both men have been shaped by their relationship with each other for better and worse. David made me a better artist, Waters admits. His musical standards, his insistence on beauty and emotional resonance pushed me to make my concepts more than just intellectual exercises. And I think I challenged David, pushed him to think beyond just creating pleasant sounds, to use his talents in service of larger ideas. When asked what he would say to David Gilmour if they had an honest, private conversation today, Waters pauses for a long moment. "I'd say thank you," he finally answers. "Thank you for the music we made together. Thank you for your contributions to something that has meant so much to so many people. Thank you for pushing back when I needed to be pushed back, even if I didn't appreciate it at the time. And I'd say, I'm sorry. Sorry for the things I said in anger. Sorry for not appreciating your talents more fully when we were working together. Sorry for the years we wasted being enemies instead of colleagues." Would Gilmour reciprocate such sentiments? Waters doesn't know, and at this point, it almost doesn't matter. What matters is that Waters has reached a place of peace with the relationship, with the history, and with the complicated legacy they share. Pink Floyd was lightning in a bottle, Waters concludes. It was a specific combination of people, talents, and circumstances that created something extraordinary. David was essential to that. I was essential to that. We were all essential to that. The fact that we couldn't sustain it, that we eventually tore it apart, that's sad, but it doesn't diminish what we achieved. At 82, I can finally see that clearly. I can finally appreciate what we had without being consumed by anger over how it ended. The story of Roger Waters and David Gilmour is not a story of reconciliation or redemption. It's a story of two immensely talented individuals who created something extraordinary together, tore it apart through ego and conflict, and have spent decades trying to make sense of what happened. At 82, Waters is finally able to tell that story with honesty, acknowledging both the brilliance of their collaboration and the inevitability of its collapse. The music remains timeless, powerful, and transcendent. And perhaps that's the real legacy, not the feuds or the lawsuits or the bitter interviews, but the albums that continue to move millions of people around the world. In the end, the music is what matters, and the music was created by Roger Waters and David Gilmour together, two men whose differences made them incompatible, but whose collaboration made them immortal.